It was a cold evening when Officer Daniels and his partner, Officer Reed, drove past the small convenience store at the corner of Maple Street. The neon sign flickered, casting a dull glow on the sidewalk. Outside, a boy in a worn-out hoodie and dirty jeans leaned against the wall. His hands were stuffed into his pockets, and his hood was pulled low over his face. Officer Daniels slowed the car. "Looks suspicious," he muttered. Reed nodded. "Let's check it out." The officers pulled up and stepped out of the vehicle. The boy barely looked at them as they approached. Daniels cleared his throat. "Hey, kid. Store owner called about someone loitering here. That you?" The boy didn't answer. He just kicked a small rock on the ground. Daniels frowned. "You got a name?" Still, no response. Reed stepped forward. "Look, we're not here to give you trouble. We just need to know what you're doing here." The boy sighed and muttered, "Nothing." Daniels exchanged a glance with Reed. Something felt off. The kid looked too clean to be homeless, but too rough to be from a good home. And he had an attitude, like he didn't care what happened next. "All right," Daniels said. "Do you have ID?" The boy shook his head. "Where do you live?" Reed asked. "Nowhere." Daniels crossed his arms. "So, you're telling me you have no name, no home, and no ID?" The boy smirked. "Sounds about right." Daniels sighed. "All right, kid. Hands where I can see them." The boy didn't move. "I said, hands up." The kid scoffed. "Seriously." Reed stepped closer. "We don't have time for games." When the boy still didn't comply, Daniels grabbed his arm. Instantly, the kid jerked back. "Don't touch me," he snapped. Reed reached for his cuffs. "That's it. You're coming with us." The boy struggled as they restrained him, but he didn't fight too hard. It was almost like he was letting them do it. "You're under arrest for resisting and trespassing," Daniels said. As they walked him toward the police car, the boy finally spoke. "You guys have no idea what you're doing." Daniels raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah? And why's that?" The boy just smiled. "You'll see." Daniels rolled his eyes. Another tough kid trying to act important. Little did he know, the kid wasn't bluffing. And in just a few hours, every officer in that station would regret putting him in cuffs. The police station was quiet when Officers Daniels and Reed walked in with the boy. A few officers glanced their way but quickly went back to their work. It wasn't unusual to bring in a teenager who refused to give his name. Daniels led the boy to the front desk. Behind it sat Sergeant Miller, a gruff-looking man with gray hair and tired eyes. He looked up from his paperwork. "What do we have here?" he asked. "Picked him up outside the corner store," Reed said. "No ID, won't say his name, just standing around looking suspicious." Miller sighed. "Another runaway." "Maybe," Daniels said, "but he's got an attitude. Thinks he's smarter than us." Miller turned to the boy. "All right, kid. What's your name?" The boy just stared at him. Miller raised an eyebrow. "Not talking, huh?" The boy smirked but said nothing. Miller shook his head. "Fine. Put him in holding until he decides to cooperate." Daniels led the boy down the hall, past the booking area, and into a small holding cell. It was empty except for a metal bench against the wall. Daniels unlocked the cuffs and motioned for him to sit. "You want to tell us anything before we process you?" he asked. The boy leaned back against the wall and stretched his legs out. "Nope." Daniels sighed. "Suit yourself." He shut the cell door and locked it. Back at the front desk, Reed typed the boy's description into the system, checking for missing person reports or juvenile records. A few minutes passed. Then he frowned. "That's weird," he muttered. Daniels looked over his shoulder. "What?" "No matches," Reed said. "No missing reports. No juvenile records. Nothing." Daniels frowned. "That doesn't make sense. Every kid has something. School records, a birth certificate, something." Reed shook his head. "Not this one. According to our system, it's like he doesn't exist." Daniels folded his arms. All right, let's try fingerprints. They walked back to the holding cell. The boy was still lounging on the bench, looking completely relaxed. Come on, Daniels said. Let's take your prints. The boy got up and followed them to the fingerprint station. He placed his fingers on the scanner without complaint. Reed pressed a button, and the machine began processing the prints. The screen blinked as it ran a search. A few seconds later, something unexpected happened. The screen flashed red. Restricted file. Authorization required. Daniels and Reed exchanged glances. Miller stepped over. What's going on? Reed pointed at the screen. His prints came back as restricted. We don't have clearance to see anything. Miller's expression changed. He straightened up. That's impossible. That kind of block only happens with high-level government cases. Daniels turned to the boy. All right, kid. Who are you? The boy just smiled. Told you. You have no idea what you're doing. Miller grabbed the phone on his desk and dialed a number. His hands were tense as he spoke. This is Sergeant Miller from the 12th Precinct. We have a situation. The room fell silent. Officers stopped their work to listen. Something about this kid wasn't normal. Then, a voice on the other end of the line made Miller's face go pale. Release him. Immediately. Miller swallowed hard. Excuse me. You heard me, the voice said. Release him right now. Daniels and Reed looked at each other, their stomachs tightening. Who was this kid? And why was someone so powerful making calls on his behalf? The boy leaned against the desk and grinned. Told you. You'd see soon enough. And they were about to. Sergeant Miller's grip on the phone tightened. His face had lost all color. Daniels and Reed stood frozen, waiting for an explanation. Sir, Miller said carefully, we don't even know this kid's name. The voice on the other end was firm. You don't need to. Just let him go. No questions. Miller hesitated. Letting someone go without proper processing was against protocol. But something about this situation felt different. Daniels frowned. Sarge, what's going on? Miller covered the phone with his hand and whispered, whoever this kid is, he has serious connections. Someone high up just told me to release him. No explanation. Daniels glanced at the boy, who sat on the edge of a chair, looking completely relaxed. He didn't seem scared or worried. In fact, he looked amused. Reed shook his head. That's crazy. We don't even know if this kid is dangerous. Miller returned to the phone. I need more than that, sir. We can't just let someone walk out of here without knowing why. There was silence on the other end. Then the voice spoke again, slower this time. If you don't release him right now, you're going to have a lot more to worry about than breaking protocol. Miller's eyes darted around the room. He had been a cop for over 20 years, but he had never gotten a call like this before. He could feel the pressure in his chest. Understood, he said finally, then hung up. Daniels crossed his arms. What now? Miller took a deep breath. We let him go. Reed's mouth fell open. Just like that. Miller nodded. Just like that. Daniels turned to the boy. All right, kid. You're free to go. The boy stood up slowly, stretching his arms. Took you long enough. Daniels felt his frustration rise. Mind telling us who you really are? The boy smirked. Nah. I think I'll let you figure that out on your own. Reed shook his head. Unbelievable. Miller unlocked the front door. Go on, kid, and stay out of trouble. The boy gave them a mock salute. No promises. He strolled out of the precinct like he owned the place. Daniels watched him disappear into the night. That was weird. Reed nodded. Yeah, and I have a bad feeling we haven't seen the last of him. But what none of them knew was that, in just a few hours, they would find out exactly who they had arrested. And when they did, panic would spread through the station like wildfire. The station had settled into its usual late-night quiet. Officer Daniels and Officer Reed sat at their desks, still thinking about the strange kid they had just let go. That was the weirdest thing I've ever seen, Reed muttered, tapping his fingers on the desk. Daniels nodded. Yeah, a nobody kid shows up with no name, no records, nothing. Then one phone call, and suddenly we have to let him go. Doesn't add up. Sergeant Miller walked out of his office, rubbing his temples. I don't like it either, he admitted. But when someone that high up gives an order, we follow it. Reed sighed. I just wish we knew who he was. Just then, the phone at the front desk rang. The young officer on duty answered. 12th Precinct, how can I? His face went pale. He quickly straightened up. Yes, sir. Right away, sir. Everyone turned to look. The officer put the call on hold and turned to Miller, his voice shaky. It's for you, sir. A general is on the line. Miller's face tightened. A general. He quickly grabbed the phone. Sergeant Miller speaking. A deep, powerful voice came through the line. I need to speak to the officer who arrested my son. Daniels and Reed froze. Miller swallowed hard. Sir, Now, the voice commanded. Miller motioned for Daniels to come forward. Daniels hesitated, then picked up the phone. Officer Daniels, sir. The general's voice was calm but cold. You arrested my son. Daniels gripped the phone tighter. Sir, he refused to give us his name. We had no way of knowing. Save it, the general interrupted. I don't care about your excuses. What I do care about is the fact that you put him in cuffs. Daniels felt his heartbeat quicken. He had dealt with angry parents before, but this was different. This wasn't just any father. This was a man with power, real power. I didn't mean any disrespect, sir, Daniels said carefully. There was silence for a moment. Then, the general spoke again, his voice lower this time. Do you have any idea who I am, officer? Daniels glanced at Miller, who shook his head slightly, warning him not to say the wrong thing. Daniels took a deep breath. No, sir. The general chuckled, but there was no humor in it. Then you should start worrying. Daniels felt a chill run down his spine. The general continued, My son is off limits. If you or anyone at that precinct so much as looks at him the wrong way again, you'll regret it. Do I make myself clear? Daniels swallowed. Crystal clear, sir. Good. The line went dead. Daniels slowly placed the phone back on the receiver. The room was silent. Every officer in the station was staring at him. Miller cleared his throat. What did he say? Daniels exhaled. He said if we mess with his son again, we'll regret it. Reed shook his head. This is bad. Miller nodded. Yeah, real bad. Daniels ran a hand through his hair. We need to find out who that kid really is. But deep down, he already knew. Whoever that boy's father was, he wasn't just any general. He was someone powerful, someone dangerous, and they had just made a big mistake. Officer Daniels sat at his desk, staring at the phone. His hands were still sweaty from the call with the general. The whole station felt tense. Nobody spoke, but everyone knew the same thing. This was serious. Reed leaned in. We have to find out who that kid really is. Daniels nodded. But how? His records are locked. Even our system can't see them. Sergeant Miller stepped forward. We don't need records, he said. We just need to check the news. A general's son. That kind of family is public information. Reed grabbed his phone and started searching. He typed in, top U.S. generals and their families. The screen loaded and several names appeared. Pictures of powerful military leaders filled the page. Some had families, some didn't. Then Reed's eyes widened. Guys, I think I found him. Daniels and Miller leaned in. On the screen was a picture of a well-decorated man in uniform, General Thomas Grayson, a powerful military leader known for his intelligence and strict discipline. Next to him was a photo of a teenage boy with the same sharp features as the kid they had arrested. Daniels let out a low whistle. That's him. Reed scrolled down. Says here General Grayson is one of the highest-ranking officers in the country. He's worked in intelligence, special operations, and even has connections to national security. Miller's face darkened. That explains the restricted files. Reed kept reading. Wait, there's more. He tapped the screen. His son, Ryan Grayson, is known for causing trouble. He's been expelled from multiple private schools, caught sneaking into places he shouldn't be, and even disappeared for weeks at a time. Daniels frowned. So he's a rich kid who likes breaking rules. Reed nodded. Seems like it. Miller sighed. This isn't just any rich kid. His father is one of the most powerful men in the country. If we had kept him locked up, things could have gone very, very bad for us. Daniels leaned back in his chair. No wonder the general called so fast. He probably has people watching his son all the time. Reed shook his head. And we put him in cuffs. Miller rubbed his temples. This is a mess. We need to make sure this doesn't go any further. Daniels looked at him. What do we do now? Miller took a deep breath. Nothing. We don't talk about this. We don't ask questions. And if that kid ever comes back, we stay far away. Reed swallowed. And if he gets in trouble again? Miller's eyes were serious. Then it's not our problem. Daniels sighed. I just hope we never see him again. But deep down, he had a feeling this wasn't the last time Ryan Grayson would cause trouble. And the next time, things might be even worse. The station had finally started to feel normal again. Officer Daniels and Officer Reed tried to push the strange night out of their minds. They focused on their regular work, paperwork, small disputes, and the usual calls. But just when they thought things had calmed down, the front doors of the station swung open. A teenager walked in, hands in his pockets, a smirk on his face. Daniel's heart sank. No way? Reed muttered under his breath. You've got to be kidding me. It was him, Ryan Grayson, the same kid they had arrested and then mysteriously let go. The same kid whose father had called and threatened them. Ryan strolled up to the front desk like he owned the place. Hey, officers, miss me? Daniels stood up. What are you doing here? Ryan shrugged. Just thought I'd drop by. You know, say hi. Reed narrowed his eyes. You're playing a dangerous game, kid. Ryan grinned. What's life without a little danger? Miller came out of his office, saw Ryan, and immediately stiffened. You. What do you want? Ryan leaned on the desk. Relax, Sergeant. I'm not in trouble. Yet. Miller folded his arms. Then why are you here? Ryan looked around the room, then leaned in slightly. Because I like watching people squirm. Daniels clenched his jaw. Listen, kid, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but we're not interested. Ryan chuckled. Oh, come on. I know you looked me up. You know who my dad is, don't you? No one answered. Ryan smirked. That's what I thought. Miller exhaled sharply. Ryan, you don't belong here. Go home. Ryan tapped his fingers on the desk. Nah, I'm good. Reed shook his head. Look, do you actually need something, or are you just wasting our time? Ryan's smirk faded slightly. For a second, it almost looked like he was thinking about something serious. But then, just as quickly, the playful grin returned. I just wanted to see how much power my last name really gives me, he said. And it turns out, a lot. Daniels glared at him. So that's it. You just wanted to prove that you can walk in here and do whatever you want. Ryan tilted his head. Pretty much. Miller's patience ran out. All right, that's enough. You need to leave. Ryan raised his hands. All right, all right. No need to get angry. He turned toward the door, but paused before stepping out. Oh, and officers. He glanced back over his shoulder. I wouldn't worry too much about upsetting my dad. He's a little scary, yeah, but I'm way worse. With that, he pushed open the door and disappeared into the night. Reed let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. That kid is bad news. Daniels nodded. Yeah. And I have a feeling this isn't the last time we'll see him. Miller sighed and ran a hand over his face. From now on, if he ever comes back, we ignore him. No matter what he says, no matter what he does. Understood. Daniels and Reed exchanged glances. Understood. But deep down, they all knew the truth. Ryan Grayson wasn't just any troublemaker. He was a storm waiting to happen. And the next time he showed up, there was no telling what kind of chaos he would bring. The station was quiet again, but the tension still hung in the air. Officer Daniels and Officer Reed couldn't stop thinking about Ryan Grayson's visit. He's testing us, Reed muttered, trying to see how far he can push. Daniels nodded. Yeah. And the worst part, we can't do anything about it. Sergeant Miller sat at his desk, his fingers tapping the wooden surface. We're not getting involved with that kid. That's an order. Daniels sighed. I get that, Sarge. But what if he does something serious? What if next time, it's not just a game? Miller's face was grim. Then we report it like we would with anyone else. But we do not go after him ourselves. Before anyone could respond, the phone rang. The young officer at the front desk picked up. 12th Precinct. How can I? His voice caught in his throat. He immediately sat up straight. Yes, sir. Right away, sir. Daniels and Reed exchanged glances. Not again. The officer turned to Miller. Sir, it's General Grayson. Miller closed his eyes for a moment, then took a deep breath and grabbed the phone. Sergeant Miller speaking. The general's voice was sharp and to the point. My son was at your station tonight. Miller swallowed. Yes, sir. I want to make one thing very clear, the general continued. Ryan is difficult. I know that. But no matter what happens, you will not interfere with him again. Do I make myself clear? Miller hesitated. Sir, if your son breaks the law, we have a duty to. You have a duty to follow my orders, the general interrupted. This isn't a request. Sergeant, stay away from my son. Miller's grip tightened on the phone. And if we don't? There was a pause. Then, the general's voice lowered, carrying a quiet threat. You don't want to find out. The line went dead. Miller placed the phone back on the receiver, his jaw clenched. What did he say? Daniels asked. Miller exhaled slowly. He told us to stay away from his son, no matter what. Reed frowned. And if we don't? Miller shook his head. Let's just say, that's not a road we want to go down. The room was silent for a long moment. Finally, Daniels spoke. This isn't right. That kid thinks he's untouchable. And his dad. He's making sure of it. Reed nodded. Yeah, but what can we do? Miller leaned back in his chair. Nothing. We do nothing. Daniels clenched his fists. So we just let that kid do whatever he wants. Miller's eyes were tired. For now, yes. Daniels wasn't satisfied. He knew this wasn't over. Ryan Grayson would be back. And next time, things could be even worse. But one thing was clear. This was no longer just about the law. This was about power. And right now, they were on the losing side. Days passed, but the tension in the station never faded. Officer Daniels and Officer Reed went about their usual duties, but something felt off. Every time the front door opened, Daniels expected to see Ryan Grayson walking in with that smug smirk on his face. Every time the phone rang, Reed braced himself for another call from the general. But nothing happened. Not until one night, when everything changed. A new crime scene. It was almost midnight when the call came in. The disturbance at an upscale apartment complex on the west side of the city. Nothing unusual. Daniels and Reed were sent to check it out. When they arrived, the doorman looked nervous. Room 1402, he said quickly. There was shouting. A fight, maybe. Then silence. Daniels nodded and led the way to the elevator. As they reached the 14th floor, Reed whispered, "You have a bad feeling." Daniels nodded. "Yeah." They knocked on the door. No answer. "Police," Daniels called. "Open up." Still nothing. Daniels tried the handle. Unlocked. He exchanged a glance with Reed, then slowly pushed the door open. The apartment was dark, but the faint glow of city lights streamed through the windows. The place was trashed. Broken glass on the floor, a chair tipped over, and a lamp shattered in the corner. And then they saw him. Ryan Grayson, sitting on the couch, staring at the floor, a thin cut on his cheek, his hands resting on his knees. Daniels flipped the light switch. "Ryan?" Ryan slowly looked up. His usual smirk was gone. His eyes were cold. Reed stepped forward. "What happened here?" Ryan didn't answer. Daniels scanned the room. No sign of anyone else, but something felt wrong. "Ryan," Daniels said again, "we need to know what's going on." Ryan exhaled, then leaned back against the couch. "Guess I messed up." Reed narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean?" Ryan let out a small, bitter laugh. "I finally pushed too far." Before Daniels could ask what he meant, footsteps sounded in the hallway. Heavy, purposeful footsteps. Then, knock, knock. Someone was at the door. Ryan stiffened. For the first time, he looked nervous. Daniels' hand moved to his gun. "Who's that?" Ryan didn't answer. Reed slowly reached for the doorknob. Bam! The door burst open, and 3 men in dark suits stepped inside. No badges, no introductions, but Daniels knew exactly what they were. Government. The man in front, a tall, sharp-eyed figure, scanned the room. Then his gaze locked onto Ryan. "Time to go," he said. Ryan clenched his jaw. "I don't." "Now." The man's voice left no room for argument. Daniels stepped forward. "Hey, wait a minute. Who are you?" The man didn't even glance at him. "This doesn't concern you, officer." Reed frowned. "If there was a crime here, we—" The man cut him off. "There was no crime." He turned to Ryan. "Stand up." Ryan hesitated. Then, finally, he pushed himself off the couch. As he passed Daniels, he muttered, "Told you I was worse than my dad." The men led him toward the door. Daniels knew he should say something, should stop them, but his instincts screamed not to interfere. As Ryan stepped into the hallway, he looked back one last time. Then the door shut behind him. Silence. Reed let out a breath. What the hell just happened? Daniels shook his head. "I don't know." Miller's warning echoed in his mind. Stay out of it. And now, more than ever, he understood why. Ryan Grayson wasn't just a rich troublemaker. He was something else entirely. And whatever he was involved in, it was bigger than all of them.